The morning sun cast long shadows across the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center as Dr. Sarah Mitchell received the emergency call that would change everything. A massive storm had torn through the coastal mountains 3 days earlier, leaving destruction in its wake. Among the casualties was a golden eagle's nest, discovered by hikers who found something extraordinary among the wreckage. "We have an unusual situation," the voice on the phone explained. "There's a golden eagle hatchling, maybe 3 weeks old, but it's unlike anything we've seen before. The bird is completely wild, aggressive beyond normal limits, and won't accept food from any of our handlers. We've tried everything." Sarah had worked with raptors for 15 years at the Mountain View Wildlife Center in Colorado. She had rehabilitated hundreds of birds, from tiny sparrowhawks to massive bald eagles. But, as she drove toward the emergency facility 2 hours away, she couldn't shake the feeling that this case would be different. The Riverside Animal Emergency Center sat nestled between towering pine trees, its modern glass facade reflecting the morning light. Sarah parked her truck and gathered her equipment bag, mentally preparing for what lay ahead. Inside, she was greeted by Dr. Marcus Webb, a veterinarian she had worked with on several difficult cases. "Sarah, thank goodness you're here," Marcus said, his face showing the strain of 3 sleepless nights. "This hatchling is like nothing I've encountered in 20 years of veterinary medicine. Follow me." They walked down a sterile hallway lined with recovery cages. The sounds of various animals filled the air, the soft chirping of injured songbirds, the occasional bark of a recovering fox, and the gentle cooing of mourning doves. But, as they approached the isolation room at the end of the hall, an entirely different sound emerged. The screech that pierced the air was raw, primal, and filled with a fury that made Sarah's blood run cold. It wasn't the typical cry of a frightened baby bird. This was the sound of something wild beyond redemption, something that had decided the entire world was its enemy. "Here's our problem," Marcus said, stopping before a large observation window. Inside the room, Sarah saw the most beautiful and terrifying golden eagle hatchling she had ever encountered. The bird stood nearly 18 inches tall, its downy feathers already showing hints of the magnificent golden brown that would mark it as an adult. But its eyes held something that made Sarah's breath catch, an intelligence mixed with absolute wildness that seemed almost supernatural. The hatchling stood in the center of its enclosure, wings partially spread in a threat display that should have been impossible for a bird so young. Its sharp beak was open, releasing that bone-chilling scream every few seconds. Around the cage lay scattered food offerings, mice, fish, and various meat portions that the bird had refused to touch for 3 days. "We've tried 4 different handlers," Marcus explained. Jenny Rodriguez, our most experienced raptor specialist, couldn't even get close enough to place food in the cage. "The bird attacks anything that enters its space. It's like it knows we're trying to help, but considers any human contact an act of war." Sarah studied the hatchling through the glass. In her years of rehabilitation work, she had learned to read the body language and emotional states of wild birds. Fear was normal in rescued raptors. Aggression was expected. But this bird showed something else entirely, a deep, instinctual hatred of human presence that went beyond typical wild behavior. "What do we know about the nest site?" Sarah asked. "High altitude, nearly impossible to reach. The hikers who found the bird said it took them 6 hours to climb down from where the nest had been. The parent eagles were nowhere to be found, probably killed in the storm. This little one survived a 50-foot fall and 3 days alone in the mountains before the hikers heard its cries." The hatchling's survival story was remarkable, but Sarah could see how that traumatic experience had shaped its attitude toward the world. The bird had learned that survival meant trusting nothing and fighting everything. "Has anyone tried approaching without protective equipment?" Sarah asked. Marcus looked at her with concern. "Sarah, this bird has talons that could tear through thick gloves. Its beak is already strong enough to break bones." "We can't risk." "I'm not suggesting anyone get hurt," Sarah interrupted. "But sometimes these traumatized raptors need to see vulnerability in their caretakers. Full protective gear can make us seem more threatening." As they watched, the hatchling suddenly launched itself at the window, its talons striking the glass with surprising force. Sarah jumped back instinctively, her heart racing. The bird's eyes locked onto hers through the glass, and, for a moment, she felt as if she was staring into the soul of something completely untamable. "We've been discussing euthanasia," Marcus said quietly. "The bird can't survive in the wild at this age, and if it won't accept food or care, there may be no other option." Sarah felt her chest tighten. She had seen birds put down before when rehabilitation proved impossible, but something about this hatchling called to her. Perhaps it was the intelligence in its eyes, or the sheer determination it showed in its defiance. This wasn't a broken bird, it was a warrior that refused to surrender. "Give me 3 days," Sarah said. "Let me try a different approach." Marcus hesitated. "Sarah, I respect your expertise, but this bird is beyond aggressive. It's dangerous." 3 days, Sarah repeated. "If I can't make progress, then we'll discuss other options." That afternoon, Sarah returned to the facility with her own equipment and a plan that would have horrified most wildlife rehabilitation experts. Instead of the standard protective gear, she wore only thin gloves and regular clothing. She carried no catching nets, no restraint equipment, and no visible tools that might trigger the bird's defensive responses. The hatchling resumed its screaming the moment Sarah entered the room. But, instead of approaching the cage, she sat down on the floor 10 feet away and simply waited. The bird's cries intensified at first, then gradually became more sporadic as it tried to understand this new human behavior. For 2 hours, Sarah sat motionless while the hatchling watched her with suspicious eyes. Occasionally, the bird would leap at the cage bars closest to her, its talons raking against the metal. But, slowly, its aggressive posturing began to change. The screams became less frequent, the wing displays less dramatic. As the sun began to set outside the room's small window, Sarah made her first attempt to communicate. She began to whistle, not the sharp, commanding sounds used in traditional raptor training, but soft, melodic tones that mimic the gentle calls parent eagles make to their young. The effect was immediate and startling. The hatchling fell completely silent, its head tilting as it listened to sounds it somehow recognized. For the first time since its rescue, the bird folded its wings and stood in a relaxed posture. Sarah continued the soft whistling for another hour, varying the pitch and rhythm while watching the hatchling's responses. The bird began moving closer to her side of the cage, its aggressive stance replaced by what appeared to be curiosity. When she finally left that evening, Marcus was waiting in the hallway. "How did you do that?" he asked. Jenny looked through the window after the bird went quiet. "She said it was actually listening to you." "Every bird speaks a language," Sarah replied. "We just have to learn how to hear it." That night, Sarah researched everything she could find about golden eagle communication and early development. She studied recordings of parent eagles calling to their young, analyzed the specific frequencies and patterns that triggered feeding responses, and developed a comprehensive plan for the next day's session. But, as she prepared for sleep, one image kept returning to her mind, the moment when the hatchling had stopped screaming and truly listened to her whistled calls. In that instant, she had seen something beyond the bird's wild fury. She had glimpsed a creature capable of trust, if only someone could find the right key to unlock it. The next morning brought new challenges. Sarah arrived to find the hatchling in an even more agitated state than before. The night shift reported that the bird had spent hours attacking its perches and food bowls, destroying everything within reach. Its enclosure looked like a war zone. "It's getting worse," Marcus warned. "The stress is affecting its health. We may not have 3 days." But Sarah had come prepared with a new strategy. Instead of sitting passively, she began to move around the room while maintaining her soft whistling calls. The hatchling tracked her movement with intense focus, its aggression gradually giving way to fascination. Hours passed as Sarah established a careful dance with the wild bird. She would approach the cage slowly, retreat when the hatchling showed signs of stress, and advance again when it seemed receptive. The process was exhausting, requiring her to read every subtle change in the bird's posture and voice. By the end of the second day, Sarah had achieved something the facility staff thought impossible. The hatchling would approach the side of the cage closest to her without showing aggressive displays. It still refused food, but its constant screaming had been replaced by occasional soft chirps that sounded almost conversational. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Webb told the assembled staff during their evening meeting. the bird is actually responding to human interaction. But we still have the feeding problem. It won't survive much longer without proper nutrition. Sarah knew the feeding challenge would be the ultimate test. Traditional force-feeding methods would destroy any progress she had made, but the hatchling's condition was becoming critical. She needed a breakthrough, and she needed it soon. On the third morning, Sarah made a decision that would either save the hatchling or end her career in wildlife rehabilitation. She entered the enclosure. The moment she stepped inside the cage, the hatchling exploded into its most violent display yet. It launched itself directly at Sarah, talons extended and beak open in a killing strike. Sarah's reflexes, honed by years of raptor work, allowed her to dodge the initial attack, but the bird wheeled around for a second assault. "Sarah, get out of there!" Marcus shouted through the intercom. But Sarah stayed calm, continuing her soft whistling while the hatchling circled her like a feathered tornado. She had gambled everything on her belief that beneath the bird's aggression lay a desperate need for connection. Gradually, the hatchling's attacks became less focused on causing harm and more like tests of Sarah's resolve. The bird would swoop close enough to touch her hair with its wing tips, then retreat to study her response. Each pass became less aggressive, more exploratory. After an hour of this deadly dance, the hatchling finally settled on a perch 3 feet from where Sarah knelt. For the first time, human and raptor shared the same space without violence. Sarah reached slowly into her bag and withdrew a small piece of fresh rabbit meat. Instead of offering it directly, she placed it on the cage floor halfway between herself and the hatchling. Then, she retreated to the far side of the enclosure and resumed her whistling. The hatchling eyed the meat suspiciously, then looked at Sarah with what seemed like understanding. Slowly, carefully, it hopped down from its perch and approached the offering. With one quick strike, it seized the meat and retreated to its corner to eat. It was the first food the bird had accepted in 4 days. As Sarah watched the hatchling tear into its meal with fierce hunger, she felt tears streaming down her face. The breakthrough had come at the moment when she had shown ultimate trust by entering the bird's space unprotected. In that gesture, the hatchling had somehow recognized not an enemy to be fought, but a potential ally to be cautiously accepted. The rehabilitation had begun, but Sarah knew this was only the first step in a journey that would test both her skills and her courage in ways she had never imagined. The breakthrough with the hatchling's first accepted meal marked the beginning of the most challenging rehabilitation case Sarah had ever undertaken. Over the following weeks, she spent 12 hours daily working with the bird, slowly building a foundation of trust that seemed to exist on a knife's edge. The hatchling, which Sarah had begun calling Thunder for its powerful voice, proved to be unlike any raptor she had previously worked with. Its intelligence was remarkable, almost unsettling. Thunder seemed to understand the daily routines of the rehabilitation center, recognizing different staff members by their footsteps and responding to each with varying degrees of acceptance or hostility. Dr. Marcus Webb documented every interaction, creating a detailed behavioral profile that challenged conventional wisdom about eagle rehabilitation. Thunder showed preference patterns that defied standard raptor psychology. The bird would accept food from Sarah's hands but would attack if anyone else attempted the same approach. It would perform basic training exercises when Sarah requested them but would become violently aggressive if other handlers tried to work with it. "It's like the bird has bonded exclusively with you," Marcus observed during one of their weekly progress meetings. "In 30 years of veterinary medicine, I've never seen such specific human preference in a wild raptor." Sarah understood Marcus's concerns. Successful wildlife rehabilitation required preparing animals to return to their natural environment. Creating too strong a bond with human caretakers could prevent successful reintroduction to the wild. But Thunder's case presented unique challenges that traditional methods couldn't address. The hatchling's traumatic rescue experience had created psychological barriers that normal rehabilitation techniques couldn't overcome. Sarah found herself developing entirely new approaches, drawing from animal psychology, raptor biology, and her own intuitive understanding of Thunder's complex personality. Each morning, Sarah began with vocalization exercises. She had discovered that Thunder responded to specific sound frequencies that mimicked golden eagle communication patterns. The bird had developed its own vocabulary of chirps, whistles, and soft screeches that seemed designed specifically for communicating with Sarah. Thunder's feeding behavior remained the most challenging aspect of its care. The bird would only eat when Sarah was present, and only if she participated in an elaborate ritual that seemed to satisfy some deep psychological need for security. Sarah would place food in the enclosure, then settle nearby while making soft calling sounds. Thunder would approach cautiously, often taking several minutes to build courage before finally feeding. Dr. Webb worried about the time commitment Sarah was devoting to a single bird. The rehabilitation center cared for dozens of animals, and Sarah's specialized attention to Thunder meant other cases received less intensive care. "You're becoming too attached," Marcus warned during one particularly difficult day when Thunder had refused to eat for anyone except Sarah. "This level of dependency isn't healthy for either of you." Sarah knew Marcus was right, but she also recognized that Thunder's case required unprecedented methods. Traditional rehabilitation focused on minimizing human contact to preserve wild instincts. Thunder's survival depended on rebuilding trust in a world it perceived as hostile. The bird needed to learn that not all humans were enemies before it could be prepared for eventual release. 3 weeks after the initial breakthrough, Sarah introduced Thunder to its first outdoor flight enclosure. The transition nearly destroyed all the progress they had made. The moment Thunder saw the outdoor environment, its wild instincts exploded with renewed fury. The bird launched itself against the enclosure walls with such violence that Sarah feared it would seriously injure itself. Thunder's screams returned with doubled intensity, and, for several terrifying minutes, the bird seemed to have reverted completely to its original traumatized state. Sarah spent 6 hours in the flight enclosure that day, slowly convincing Thunder that the outdoor space was safe. She used every technique she had developed during their indoor training, but the bird's fear of open sky seemed almost pathological. Thunder would huddle in the darkest corner of the enclosure, wings wrapped around its body like a protective shield. Post-traumatic stress, Dr. Webb diagnosed after observing Thunder's behavior. The bird associates open air with the trauma of falling from its destroyed nest. "We may be dealing with psychological damage that goes beyond normal rehabilitation parameters." Sarah refused to accept that Thunder might be too damaged to recover. She began researching cases of trauma recovery in wild birds, consulting with wildlife psychologists across the country, and developing new therapeutic approaches specifically designed for Thunder's unique needs. The solution came from an unexpected source. Sarah's 8-year-old nephew, Tommy, was visiting the rehabilitation center on a weekend when most of the staff was absent. Sarah had brought Thunder outside for one of their challenging flight training sessions, and the bird was displaying its usual fear-based aggression. Tommy watched from a safe distance as Sarah worked with the terrified eagle. Unlike the adult observers who had witnessed Thunder's training, Tommy showed no fear of the bird's aggressive displays. Instead, he seemed fascinated by Thunder's emotional intensity. "Why is he so scared?" Tommy asked. "Thunder fell from his nest during a big storm," Sarah explained. "He's afraid of being hurt again." Tommy considered this information with the straightforward logic that only children possess. He needs to know he can trust the sky again. The simplicity of Tommy's observation struck Sarah like lightning. She had been approaching Thunder's rehabilitation from an adult perspective, focusing on behavior modification and psychological conditioning. But Thunder was still essentially a child itself, a juvenile bird whose emotional development had been catastrophically interrupted. Children, Sarah realized, might understand Thunder's needs in ways that adult experts couldn't. "Tommy," Sarah said carefully, "would you like to help me with Thunder's training?" The suggestion horrified Dr. Webb when Sarah presented it the following Monday. Allowing a child to participate in the rehabilitation of a dangerous wild bird violated every safety protocol in the facility's handbook. "Absolutely not," Marcus stated firmly. "That bird has attacked trained professionals. I won't risk a child's safety." But Sarah had spent the weekend researching successful cases where children had participated in wildlife rehabilitation. She found documented instances of young people forming unique bonds with traumatized animals, relationships that facilitated recovery in ways adult intervention couldn't achieve. Thunder responds to innocence, Sarah argued. Adult approach patterns trigger its defensive responses, but children don't carry the same threatening energy. Tommy wasn't afraid of Thunder, and Thunder seemed to sense the difference. The debate continued for days. Sarah presented research papers, consulted with child psychologists who worked with animal therapy programs, and developed comprehensive safety protocols for potential child involvement in Thunder's care. Finally, Marcus agreed to a carefully controlled test. Tommy would visit the rehabilitation center under strict supervision, with multiple safety barriers between him and Thunder. If the bird showed any signs of aggression, the experiment would end immediately. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. When Tommy entered Thunder's outdoor enclosure area, the bird's behavior changed dramatically. Instead of its usual fearful huddling, Thunder stood tall and alert, studying the child with obvious curiosity. The aggressive posturing that marked its interactions with adult staff was completely absent. Tommy followed Sarah's instructions perfectly, moving slowly and speaking in quiet, gentle tones. He carried no equipment, made no sudden movements, and radiated the calm confidence that children often display around animals. Thunder watched Tommy for nearly an hour before making its first tentative approach. The bird moved closer to the enclosure barrier than it had ever ventured when other observers were present. Most remarkably, Thunder began vocalizing, not the harsh screams of distress it usually produced, but soft chirping sounds that resembled contentment. "He likes me," Tommy whispered, his face glowing with wonder. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion as she watched Thunder respond to the child's presence. For the first time since its rescue, the eagle seemed to remember what it felt like to trust another being without reservation. Over the following weeks, Tommy became an integral part of Thunder's rehabilitation team. Under careful supervision, the boy participated in feeding sessions, flight training exercises, and socialization activities that gradually rebuilt the bird's confidence. Thunder's progress accelerated dramatically. The bird began exploring its flight enclosure voluntarily, no longer cowering in dark corners when exposed to open sky. Its appetite improved, and, for the first time, Thunder began exhibiting natural hunting behaviors when presented with live prey. Most importantly, Thunder's trust began expanding beyond Sarah and Tommy. The bird started accepting food from other staff members, though it remained most comfortable with its primary caregivers. The exclusive dependency that had worried Dr. Webb gradually evolved into a more balanced relationship pattern. "This is remarkable," Marcus admitted after observing a particularly successful training session. "The child's involvement has unlocked something in the bird that we couldn't reach with conventional methods." But, even as Thunder's rehabilitation progressed, Sarah faced a growing dilemma. The bird's strong attachment to Tommy created new challenges for eventual release preparation. Thunder had learned to trust humans again, perhaps too well. The goal of wildlife rehabilitation was to preserve wild instincts while healing physical and psychological trauma. Thunder seemed to be developing a preference for human companionship that might prevent successful reintroduction to its natural habitat. The question that haunted Sarah's nights was whether they were saving Thunder or creating a bird too comfortable with humans to survive in the wild. The answer would determine everything about the next phase of the eagle's recovery. As autumn approached, marking 6 months since Thunder's rescue, Sarah knew that difficult decisions lay ahead. The bird had regained its physical strength and flight capabilities, but its psychological recovery remained complicated by its unusual relationship patterns. Thunder had learned to love again, but in ways that might make it impossible to return to the untamed world where golden eagles belonged. The rehabilitation team faced the complex challenge of preserving the trust they had worked so hard to rebuild while preparing Thunder for a life that required it to fear and avoid human contact. The next phase of Thunder's journey would test everything they had learned about healing the deepest wounds that nature and circumstance could inflict. Sarah looked at the magnificent bird that had become the center of her world and wondered if love itself might become the greatest obstacle to Thunder's ultimate freedom. As winter settled over the Colorado mountains, Thunder had grown into a magnificent golden eagle. Standing nearly 3 feet tall with a wingspan approaching 7 feet, the bird possessed all the physical attributes necessary for survival in the wild. But the psychological preparation for release remained the most challenging aspect of the rehabilitation process. Sarah faced a heartbreaking paradox. The trust and affection that had saved Thunder's life now threatened to prevent its return to freedom. The eagle had learned to associate human presence with safety and comfort, exactly the opposite of what wild raptors needed for survival. Dr. Marcus Webb brought in Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a specialist in wildlife release preparation who had successfully reintroduced over 200 raptors to their natural environments. Dr. Rodriguez observed Thunder for a week before delivering her assessment. "This bird presents a unique challenge," she told Sarah during their consultation meeting. "Thunder has all the physical capabilities for survival, but its psychological profile is unlike any raptor I've evaluated. The human bonding is profound, almost familial in nature." Sarah felt her heart sink as Dr. Rodriguez continued her analysis. "Normally, we would begin weaning the bird from human contact months before release. Thunder's case is complicated by the depth of attachment to specific individuals. The bird recognizes Tommy from across the rehabilitation center and becomes visibly excited when the child visits. That level of human recognition could be fatal in the wild. The brutal reality of wildlife rehabilitation meant that some animals couldn't be successfully returned to their natural habitat. Birds too comfortable with humans often approached people in the wild, leading to injuries or death. Thunder's survival had depended on learning to trust humans, but that same trust now endangered its chances for freedom. Sarah requested permission to develop an experimental release preparation program specifically designed for Thunder's unique circumstances. Instead of the standard isolation protocols used to reduce human bonding, she proposed a gradual independence training system that would preserve Thunder's psychological health while rebuilding appropriate wariness of humans. "We need to teach Thunder that trusting specific humans in specific circumstances is acceptable, but that all other human contact represents danger," Sarah explained to the review board. "The bird is intelligent enough to learn complex behavioral distinctions if we design the training properly." The board was skeptical. Traditional wildlife rehabilitation relied on proven methods that had been developed through decades of successful releases. Sarah's proposed approach was experimental, untested, and potentially dangerous if it failed to properly prepare Thunder for wild conditions. But Thunder's case had already challenged every conventional assumption about raptor rehabilitation. The board granted Sarah 6 months to implement her experimental program, with the understanding that failure would likely mean Thunder would spend its life in captivity at an educational facility. Sarah began Thunder's independence training with the most difficult step, reducing Tommy's involvement in the bird's daily care. The decision was painful for everyone involved, but necessary for Thunder's development. Tommy understood the situation with the clarity that children often bring to complex problems. "Thunder needs to learn to be wild again," he told Sarah. "I want him to be free, even if it means he won't want to see me anymore." The 8-year-old's maturity and selflessness humbled the adult caregivers who struggled with the emotional challenges of release preparation. Tommy's last training session with Thunder was emotionally devastating for everyone present, but marked the beginning of the bird's journey toward independence. Thunder's response to Tommy's absence was immediate and concerning. The bird became lethargic, refused food for 2 days, and displayed signs of depression that worried the entire rehabilitation team. Sarah questioned whether the separation approach was causing psychological harm that might undo months of progress. But, gradually, Thunder began adjusting to the new routine. Sarah modified her interactions with the bird, becoming more businesslike and less emotionally engaged. She stopped using the soft vocalizations that had characterized their early bonding period, replacing them with neutral training commands that encouraged compliance without affection. The transformation was painful to watch. Thunder seemed confused by Sarah's changed demeanor, repeatedly attempting to recreate the intimate communication patterns they had previously shared. When those attempts failed to elicit the usual warm responses, Thunder began withdrawing emotionally. Dr. Rodriguez monitored the process closely, documenting Thunder's behavioral changes and assessing readiness for the next phase of training. "The bird is experiencing appropriate stress," she observed. "This separation anxiety is normal and necessary for developing independence." Sarah introduced Thunder to a series of challenges designed to rebuild its natural wariness while maintaining flight skills and hunting abilities. The bird was exposed to unfamiliar humans who used assertive postures and loud voices to trigger defensive responses. Thunder learned to associate unknown people with potential threats, gradually developing the cautious behavior patterns essential for wild survival. Hunting training presented its own complications. Thunder possessed excellent flying skills and sharp reflexes, but its prey capture techniques remained underdeveloped due to its early rescue and extended captivity. Sarah worked with Thunder for hours daily, using remote-controlled prey models to stimulate natural hunting behaviors. The bird's intelligence proved both an advantage and a challenge during hunting preparation. Thunder quickly learned to identify the mechanical prey as artificial, losing interest in pursuing targets it recognized as non-threatening. Sarah had to continually modify the training equipment to maintain Thunder's engagement and prevent the bird from becoming too comfortable with human-created hunting scenarios. Spring brought the most crucial test of Thunder's development: introduction to other golden eagles. The rehabilitation center had arranged for Thunder to be housed near 2 wild eagles that were recovering from minor injuries. The goal was to trigger Thunder's social instincts and encourage natural eagle behaviors that had been suppressed during its human-focused rehabilitation. The first encounter was a disaster. Thunder showed no recognition of the other eagles as members of its own species. The bird appeared genuinely confused by their presence, studying them with the detached curiosity it might show toward any unfamiliar animal. When the other eagles called to Thunder using typical golden eagle vocalizations, Thunder responded with the modified sounds it had developed for communicating with humans. Dr. Rodriguez was deeply concerned. The bird has essentially learned to be human rather than eagle. Its species identification patterns have been fundamentally altered by the rehabilitation process. Sarah felt sick as she watched Thunder interact with its own kind. The other eagles quickly identified Thunder as abnormal, responding to its presence with aggression and territorial warnings. Thunder seemed bewildered by their hostility, expecting the same acceptance it had received from humans. The rehabilitation team faced a crisis. Thunder's psychological recovery had been so successful in human terms that it had prevented normal eagle development. The bird thought it was human, expected human responses from other creatures, and had no understanding of how to function within eagles' social structures. "We may have saved the bird's life only to destroy its ability to live as a golden eagle," Dr. Rodriguez concluded after observing several days of failed eagle-to-eagle interactions. Sarah refused to accept this assessment as final. She researched cases of cross-species bonding in wildlife rehabilitation, consulted with experts in animal psychology, and developed a radical new approach to Thunder's preparation. If Thunder couldn't learn to be a normal eagle through conventional methods, perhaps it could learn to be an exceptional eagle through unconventional ones. Sarah designed an intensive immersion program that would expose Thunder to wild eagle behaviors in controlled circumstances. Instead of trying to eliminate Thunder's human bonding patterns, she would use them as a foundation for building appropriate eagle responses. The process began with video presentations. Sarah showed Thunder hours of footage featuring wild golden eagles in their natural environment. She played recordings of eagle calls, mating displays, territorial behaviors, and hunting techniques while Thunder watched from its enclosure. Initially, Thunder showed little interest in the eagle footage. But, gradually, certain behaviors began capturing the bird's attention. Thunder became fascinated by hunting scenes, watching intently as wild eagles pursued prey in mountain environments. Sarah began incorporating eagle vocalizations into her training sessions, using recorded calls to trigger responses from Thunder. The bird slowly learned to recognize and respond to authentic eagle communication, though it continued to prefer its modified human-oriented sounds. The breakthrough came when Sarah played footage of a parent eagle teaching hunting techniques to its offspring. Thunder watched the video with intense concentration, then began attempting to mimic the hunting behaviors it had observed. For the first time, Thunder seemed to recognize that it belonged to a larger category of beings beyond its immediate human caretakers. The bird began showing interest in the other captive eagles, though its approach remained awkward and unconventional. Dr. Rodriguez documented every aspect of Thunder's evolving behavior, creating a detailed record of what might be the most unique wildlife rehabilitation case in modern history. "This bird is learning to be wild through intellectual understanding rather than instinctual development," she noted. "It's choosing to be an eagle rather than simply being one." Thunder's progress accelerated as spring turned toward summer. The bird developed hunting skills that surpassed many wild eagles, compensating for its social deficiencies with exceptional intelligence and adaptability. Thunder learned to read weather patterns, identify thermal currents, and navigate complex mountain terrain with remarkable precision. But questions remained about Thunder's ultimate viability for release. The bird had learned eagle behaviors without developing eagle instincts. It could perform all the actions necessary for survival, but its motivations remained fundamentally different from those of wild raptors. Sarah watched Thunder soar through its flight enclosure and wondered whether they were preparing a magnificent eagle for freedom or creating an artificial bird that could never truly belong in the wild. The final test would come when Thunder faced the ultimate challenge, surviving completely alone in the vast wilderness where golden eagles ruled the sky. The rehabilitation team scheduled Thunder's release for early autumn, when weather conditions would be optimal and prey would be abundant. But, as the date approached, everyone involved questioned whether they were giving Thunder the greatest gift of freedom or condemning it to a lonely death in a world it might never fully understand. Thunder had learned to be an eagle, but whether it could learn to live as one remained the final, unanswerable question that would determine the ultimate success or failure of the most ambitious wildlife rehabilitation project any of them had ever attempted. The release date arrived with perfect autumn weather. Clear skies stretched endlessly over the Colorado mountains, and thermal currents rose from sun-warmed valleys like invisible highways designed for soaring eagles. Sarah stood at the edge of Thunder's transport carrier, her hand resting on the door mechanism that would either grant freedom or seal the bird's fate. Thunder waited inside the carrier with calm alertness, its magnificent golden eyes scanning the mountain landscape that would become its home. 18 months had passed since the traumatic rescue that brought the hatchling to the rehabilitation center. Now, a fully mature golden eagle prepared to face the ultimate test of survival. Dr. Marcus Webb checked the tracking equipment one final time. Thunder wore a lightweight GPS transmitter that would allow the rehabilitation team to monitor its movements for the first year after release. The device would provide crucial data about Thunder's adaptation to wild conditions and help determine whether their experimental rehabilitation methods had truly prepared the bird for independence. Radio frequency is clear, Marcus announced. We'll be able to track Thunder's movements within a 50-mile radius of the release site. Dr. Elena Rodriguez made final notes in her observation journal, documenting environmental conditions and Thunder's pre-release behavior. Wind patterns are optimal for initial flight, she reported. Prey activity in the area has been confirmed as abundant. All conditions favor successful release. But Sarah felt her heart pounding as she prepared to open the carrier door. Despite all their preparation and training, no one could predict how Thunder would respond to unlimited freedom after 18 months of captivity. The bird possessed all the skills necessary for survival, but skills learned in controlled environments didn't always translate to success in the chaotic reality of wilderness life. Tommy stood beside Sarah, his 8-year-old face showing a mixture of excitement and sadness that reflected everyone's emotions. The boy had requested permission to attend the release, understanding that this might be the last time he ever saw Thunder. "Is he ready?" Tommy asked quietly. Sarah looked into Thunder's eyes through the carrier opening and saw something that gave her confidence. The wariness they had worked so hard to develop was clearly present, but so was an unmistakable eagerness to explore the vast world beyond the carrier walls. "He's ready," Sarah said, and opened the door. Thunder emerged slowly, stepping onto the wooden platform that had been constructed at the edge of a cliff overlooking a pristine mountain valley. The bird stood motionless for several seconds, wings slightly spread as it tested the mountain air currents. The rehabilitation team held their breath, watching for Thunder's first movements as a free bird. Would the eagle launch immediately into flight, or would it hesitate, perhaps even try to return to the safety of human care? Thunder turned its head towards Sarah and Tommy, studying them with an expression that seemed to convey both gratitude and farewell. Then, without warning, the magnificent bird spread its wings to their full 7-foot span and leaped into the void. The sight of Thunder in free flight was breathtaking. The eagle's powerful wings caught the thermal currents with practiced ease, lifting it effortlessly into the mountain sky. Thunder soared higher and higher, its golden feathers gleaming in the afternoon sunlight as it explored its new freedom. "Magnificent," Dr. Rodriguez breathed, watching through binoculars as Thunder executed perfect aerial maneuvers that demonstrated complete mastery of flight dynamics. For nearly an hour, Thunder flew in expanding circles around the release site, seeming to map the geographical boundaries of its new territory. The bird's flight pattern showed confident navigation skills and sophisticated understanding of wind currents that impressed even experienced raptor experts. But, as the afternoon wore on, Thunder's behavior began to concern the observation team. Instead of continuing to explore the vast wilderness available to it, Thunder kept returning to circle above the release site where the humans waited. The bird seemed reluctant to venture beyond visual contact with its former caretakers. "This is what we worried about," Dr. Rodriguez murmured. "The human bonding may be preventing normal territorial establishment." Sarah watched Thunder's repeated passes overhead with growing anxiety. The eagle appeared torn between its desire for exploration and its attachment to familiar humans. This hesitation could prove fatal if Thunder couldn't commit fully to wild behavior patterns. As evening approached, Thunder made a decision that shocked everyone present. The eagle descended toward the release platform, landing gracefully on a rocky outcropping less than 30 feet from where the humans stood. "It's trying to return to captivity," Marcus said with dismay. "The release has failed." But Sarah studied Thunder's posture and behavior more carefully. The bird wasn't displaying the submissive body language of a captive animal seeking human care. Instead, Thunder stood tall and alert, its eyes scanning the surrounding landscape for potential threats or opportunities. Thunder spent the night on the rocky outcropping, occasionally calling with soft vocalizations that seemed directed toward the humans below. But, as dawn broke over the mountains, Thunder's behavior changed dramatically. A wild golden eagle appeared on the horizon, soaring along the valley ridges as it patrolled its established territory. Thunder immediately responded to the newcomer's presence with aggressive calls and threat displays that demonstrated perfect recognition of territorial competition. Without hesitation, Thunder launched into the air and flew directly toward the wild eagle. The two magnificent birds engaged in an aerial confrontation that showcased Thunder's complete mastery of eagle combat techniques. The wild eagle, presumably an experienced adult with years of territorial defense experience, quickly recognized Thunder as a formidable opponent. After several minutes of aerial sparring, the established resident chose to retreat rather than risk serious combat with the determined newcomer. Thunder had claimed its first territory through successful intimidation of another wild eagle. "Incredible," Dr. Rodriguez exclaimed. "Thunder just established dominance over a native bird. The territorial instincts are completely intact." Over the following days, the GPS tracking data revealed Thunder's rapid adaptation to wild conditions. The eagle explored an ever-expanding territory, successfully hunted natural prey, and demonstrated all the behaviors necessary for independent survival. But Thunder's story took an unexpected turn during its second week of freedom. The tracking data showed that Thunder had begun following human hikers and mountain climbers, maintaining a safe distance while observing their activities with apparent fascination. "The bird is studying human behavior in the wild," Sarah realized as she analyzed the movement patterns. "Thunder is learning how to coexist with humans while maintaining its wild status." Thunder's approach to human-wildlife interaction was unlike anything documented in eagle behavior studies. The bird would observe hiking groups from elevated perches, seeming to catalog their activities and assess threat levels. When humans appeared to be in distress or danger, Thunder would circle overhead, its call seeming to alert other humans to the situation. Mountain rescue teams reported several incidents where Thunder's presence had helped locate lost hikers. The eagle's distinctive calls and circling behavior patterns had drawn attention to people who needed assistance. Thunder was developing into something unprecedented, a wild golden eagle that served as a bridge between human and wildlife communities. 3 months after release, Thunder's territorial establishment was complete. The eagle controlled a vast hunting ground spanning nearly 200 square miles of prime mountain habitat. Thunder had successfully mated with a wild female, establishing a nest site that would ensure the continuation of its genetic line. But Thunder maintained its unique relationship with humans, allowing Tommy and Sarah to observe from a respectful distance when they visited the territory. The eagle would acknowledge their presence with specific calls that seemed to indicate recognition and acceptance, while maintaining the appropriate wariness that ensured its continued wild status. Tommy grew into his role as Thunder's primary human contact, developing skills in wildlife observation and eagle behavior that amazed professional biologists. The boy became a bridge between Thunder's world and the human community, helping to establish protocols for peaceful coexistence. Thunder chose to be both wild and connected, Tommy observed during one of their mountain visits. It didn't have to give up everything it learned with us to become a real eagle. Dr. Rodriguez published Thunder's case study in multiple scientific journals, documenting the first successful rehabilitation of a traumatized raptor through human-eagle bonding techniques. Thunder's story challenged fundamental assumptions about wildlife rehabilitation and opened new possibilities for treating psychologically damaged wild animals. Sarah continued her work at the Rehabilitation Center, applying lessons learned from Thunder's case to help other traumatized wildlife. She developed specialized protocols for animals suffering from post-traumatic stress, creating treatment programs that honored both wild instincts and healing relationships. Thunder's offspring inherited their parents' exceptional intelligence and adaptability, establishing their own territories throughout the mountain region. The genetic line that had nearly been lost in a storm now thrived across hundreds of square miles of wilderness. Years later, mountain climbers still reported encounters with a magnificent golden eagle that seemed unusually tolerant of human presence. Thunder had become a legend among wilderness enthusiasts, representing the possibility that humans and wildlife could coexist with mutual respect and understanding. The hatchling that no creature could tame had learned the greatest lesson of all: the true wildness didn't require the complete rejection of connection, but rather the wisdom to choose when and how to trust. Thunder soared free above the mountains where it had nearly died, its powerful wings carrying not just the weight of survival, but the hope that healing was possible even after the deepest trauma. In learning to trust a human child, Thunder had discovered that love and wildness could coexist, creating something more magnificent than either could achieve alone. The Rehabilitation Center's motto changed after Thunder's successful release: some creatures cannot be tamed, but all creatures can learn to trust again. Thunder's story became a testament to the power of patience, understanding, and the unbreakable bonds that can form between species when both choose courage over fear. In the end, Thunder had not been tamed, it had been free to become everything a golden eagle could be, while never forgetting the humans who had helped it remember how to trust the sky.